Good to see you. Been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. Um, and then when we're done here, don't close out your browser window until it's uploaded all the way. I'll let you know.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so let's just I'll keep it to 30 minutes, and I'll respect your time. Um, it is the 90th anniversary of the Barman Declaration coming up at the end of this month, and we have been doing a series on Monday nights going thesis by thesis. And so I thought it would be good just as a supplement for folks who are participating in that to hear your reflections on the Declaration as a whole, on why Karl Barth's important right now, and maybe your thoughts on the second thesis in particular. So the floor is yours, Stan.
I think uh, the significance of Barman was its Christological center and Barth's way of putting the Christological center, starting with a scripture verse each time, and then with the assertion of, I was going to read it, that Christian church is the congregation of the brethren in which Jesus Christ acts present as the Lord in word and sacrament through the Holy Spirit as the church. And this is Article 3. As the church pardoning sinners, it has to testify in the midst of a sinful world, and its faith as with its obedience, with its message as with its order, that it's solely his property,
Hmm.
that it lives and wants to live solely in the comfort and from his direction, in the expectation of his appearance. I mean, that's uh, Eddie Barth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what is remarkable about Barman is that sounds like something having to do with religious, what might be called religious epistemology.
Mm-hmm.
What is what is what is the knowledge from which you are acting in Barman? But what it shows, and what I think the articles, in particular the first two articles, setting up the third article, is a way of indicating how fundamental theological claims about Christ as the center of life is not just about the claim, but it also is about how you see the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, and what Barth does with Barman is you see how his uh, fundamental theological moves are not just theological moves, but they're politics.
Yeah.
And and therefore you cannot uh, say something like, well, you believe this about Jesus and it has these political implications. What you,
Yeah.
what you believe about Jesus is the politics.
And it wasn't until just recently that it occurred to me that Barth is working on these theses around the same time that he's rejecting natural theology and the church dogmatics.
Exactly. That's the point. I mean, he does it, of course, in the second article, explicitly rejects natural theology. Of course, that puts me in something of a bind, since Giffords, I argue that Barth is the great natural theologian, which I still want to maintain. Just transforms what you meant by natural theology.
So one of the things I've been rereading Abraham Bush's autobiography.
Oh,
Yeah, and one of the things that's astonishing is Bart's ability to know what time it was, that even among the delegates who showed up for the Barman Declaration, some of them wanted to insert praise for what God has been doing through Adolf Hitler. And so it's easy to read the Barman Declaration in 2024 and make analogies from that time to this time. And, and it's hard to know whether those are appropriate or not. And I'm wondering, how do you think Christians should go about discerning the time?
I think a fundamental criteria is what is happening in the world that makes the worship of God a secondary phenomenon for our lives. And that once you domesticate God, then you're in deep trouble. And Barman was a response to the domestication of God by the German Christians. And that I think I pulled out an essay that I wrote 3 or 4 years ago, which it was called Apocalyptic Christianity, Democracy, and the Pandemic. And I start Barman. We need something like a Barman Declaration to challenge the German Christians' accommodation with Hitler. That was my first thought on May 22nd, 2020, when I read Trump's order for churches, synagogues, and mosques to open and welcome all those ready to respond to Trump's desire for everyone to return to church, at prohibiting the gathering of diverse groups in the first weeks of the response to the virus. Trump suddenly commanded Christians, Jews, and Muslims to open their places of worship as if the virus did not exist. On reflection, I thought I was letting my dislike of Trump tempt me to overreact to a sudden call from religious people to attend church. Trump was urging Christians to return to church as a sign he had defeated or come close to defeating the virus. I thought we needed something like Barman, no doubt because of my deep and profound dislike of Trump. Trump is stupid, crass, self-absorbed, and shallow. This could go long. On further reflection, I think my original response was not without reason. Barman was at the time the most significant response Christians had made against Hitler. It was written in 1934 primarily by the extraordinary theologian Barth. But you know that you need a Barman when you have someone like Trump telling Christians I need to go back to church.
And that's a good point, because Abraham Bush, in his commentary on the Barman Declaration, makes the note that the second thesis in particular is not a rejection of Luther or Calvin's two kingdoms doctrine. It's a rejection of this new German idea that there is no law of God other than the law of the state.
But I think he's wrong about that. I admire Bush. I think the Great Passion is the best secondary art there is. But I think what you have in Barman is really leaving behind the two kingdoms doctrine of the Lutherans.
Say more about that.
Well, there are all kinds of debates about Luther's way of understanding the two kingdoms, but you have the order of creation and the order of redemption. And the order of creation is a natural law that is about the sustaining of moral law that would stop one another from ripping one another's throats out.
Mm-hmm.
So it was fundamentally a underwriting of the legal modes of life associated with what was good for the German state. You have the same thing. I mean, in America, uh, we just don't have it systematized from out of the Reformation,
Mm-hmm.
but we have the assumption that there is, in something called democracy, a mode of life that isn't necessarily related to God, but would sustain the uh, the living of life uh, in a way that keeps the bad guys in check.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way to put it. So it was assumed in Lutheranism that the ethics of the world was to be regarded as legitimate in a way that uh, meant that the church had a different mode of life in terms of sanctification. Uh, and I think that that is still presumed in Barman,
Mm-hmm.
in particular, uh, the language of the state that you get in the later article is, I think, very problematic because what is the state? I mean, that's an abstraction
Mm-hmm.
that is relatively recent. At one time, you would have said the king or the queen rather for that. So I think that there's at least the hint of still the two kingdom doctrine that Barth would stand against. So he he has passages that sound like that. He's trying to find a way to have something like that. Bonhoeffer, of course, wanted to drop the orders of creation
Mm-hmm.
and talk about mandates, which he thought were not as as just a given in the way that Lutheran orders of creation were a given.
Can you explain to people how Bart takes the law gospel distinction and upends it? Because that shows up here in Barman as well.
That's true. Um, it's been a long time since I thought about that. So, but for Bart, the law gospel dualism is qualified because the law is Christ in a way that the great the, the gospel is law for Bart, and therefore he's in 3:4. He's he shows the creativity of how he understands the gospel as a mode of life. Instance, I mean, he starts his account of morality with covenant and prayer,
Mm-hmm.
which is a challenge to presumption that you have a freestanding ethic separate from who Christ is.
Yeah, and then that shows up in the Barman Declaration with Bart ruling out this idea that you can have um, some sort of faith relationship with Jesus Christ that does not apply to all areas of your life,
Right.
which is a distinction that a lot of Christians today seem to want to make.
Well, the I mean, Eichmann, I was just a guy that kept the trains running on time, was a perversion of the Lutheran law gospel distinction, uh, and a perversion of the two kingdoms. But the two kingdoms could be interpreted as a way to say I just was keeping the trains running on time. So law is doing the work of the agents of the state. And it goes back, I mean, it was celebrated by Luther's milkmaid.
Mm-hmm.
She was just milking the cows. And it just happened to be that it was a Nazi cow. But those were tensions within the production uh, of Barman. There were, I mean, there was a theologian there named Saucy,
Mm-hmm.
was was as virulent and anti-Nazi as you could want, but he didn't sign Barman because it called into question two kingdom doctrine. He was a deep Lutheran thinker.
Yeah. So speaking of Sasa, Bart lamented what he called the missing seventh thesis for the rest of his life. And so, what do you think the legacy of Barman is, given that it doesn't directly address the Jews? And that seems relevant given the given the wave of anti-Semitism that seems to have been unleashed.
Yeah, Bart later, confessed that he felt quite guilty for not having addressed the issue of the Jews. He did that on reading Bonhoeffer, and it's an indication of Bart's honesty about the whole question of the role of Judaism. By the way, I should mention just last week on Friday there was a program at Princeton Seminary on Barman that Eberhard Busch read a paper. His son read the paper that he had written for the event, and
How was that?
it was very good. I thought it was. Everyone was really excellent in terms of what they had to say about Barman, and there was quite a long discussion about what is the role of Barman and without the Jews. And I think that Barman, if I'm right, Barman is the production by for the church in a way that you see ecclesiology being a force for a reclaiming of the church as the first politics
Mm-hmm.
of Christians, then it's not to be forgotten. Uh, but that's my particular, I suggested at the conference, I did it, it was virtual, but interestingly enough, I think that the ecclesiology of Barman is closer to the Anabaptist
Mm-hmm.
than the Reformed. And of course, the
Ex-
relationship,
Explain that. So how is it more Anabaptist than Reformed?
um, because the first task of the church is to be the church for the world, not to be a worldly church. So,
Yeah, I was because I was reading in Bush's autobiography that around 1934, Anglo churches reached out to Bart and asked how they could be of help to the confessing church movement, and Bart's response was for them to do away with all natural theology in their churches, and so it was. So I think so Barman gives a model for um, a church to address its time without becoming a quote unquote activist church.
right, exactly. Yeah, I tried to make that point at Princeton, but I don't think I was very clear. But I think that um, Barman, Barman didn't become a fundamental confession for the church in Germany, I think is an indication that the ecclesiologies that were receiving it, the people represented, uh, found it awkward.
Mm, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. That's that. Yeah.
I mean, the
So
confession
yeah.
church turned to be a mess.
Hmm.
Of course, it was written against the German Christians. That is, the Christians that were wanting to make Hitler part of the new uh, discovery for German German moral identification.
So we talked about the Jews. You're someone who spent your entire career in university settings. I'm just wondering, as you watch the news, read the newspaper now about what's going on campuses across the country. Um, you know, what are the thoughts that you have?
I I had no idea that there were that many Palestinians in university settings, which is a good thing that there are. I I think you know Israel lost a golden opportunity that after the destruction by Hamas, um, they bombed Gaza mercy, without mercy, when I think they should have turned to Palestinians and said, you no doubt despair at Hamas. Uh, will you help us stop this kind slaughter. In other words, if Israel had seen that she's in uh, that she's in the same world as Palestinians
Hmm.
who have no use for Hamas, that you might have had a way of moving finally to a two-state solution. But I just regret the tragedy of that situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's silly to pontificate on saying, well, Israel ought to not attack in the South. What bothers me a little about the demonstrations is like the call for disinvestment, and that you don't know if that's any kind of demand that would result in a lesser violence.
Mm-hmm.
Just it's just it's like college students are desperate to have some sense that they matter.
Hmm.
And that's what I see happening, at least in some of the demonstrations.
Well, that connects. You mentioned earlier that democracy is a system that doesn't need God for its ordering, and that leaves an emptiness for
Right,
a moral purpose.
right. Yeah, I think it. I think the lack of moral purpose uh, creates a loneliness that the demonstrations almost qualify for. I mean, that I'm here with another 2 or 3 thousand creates a sense that I I'm with people that make me less lonely.
It's as yeah. The line you got from Robert Jensen about the world losing its story, um, that loss will embody itself in different ways.
Someone that I've been watching podcasts, that kind of thing, that seems to me to be saying some very true things about our current situation is David Brooks.
Hmm.
Uh, he's a very insightful guy,
Mm-hmm. And a good writer too.
very good. Right.
So Stan, I'm just here at the end of your 30 minutes. How is retirement treating you?
Not well. I I've got a lot. I'm 83, and I have some physical problems. Like my back has gone out. I've got to have an operation on that in a couple of weeks. So I'm not very happy with that. And my sight is bad because it turns out gravity pulls down your eyelids after a while.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they have a therapy now that they slice them and glue them up a little. I have to have that done too. So I'm
What are you reading?
well. That's the problem. I can't read.
Oh, okay.
But books to read is Kavanaugh's new book.
Okay. No, I haven't seen it.
The Uses of Idolatry.
That's a good title.
It's a very good title. It's a big book.
Huh. I'll check it out.
Yeah, you'll like it. You'll see. And Steve Long's got a new book called On Teaching and Learning Christian Ethics.
Okay.
It's very good. And I go back and I read Nitro. I've been reading
Okay.
autobiography again.
Well, I'm good. I was recently in Ireland and I got a couple of grandfather shirts. So I can be Stanley Harawas for Halloween, maybe.
Where in Ireland were you?
We did a big loop all the way around.
Oh, that's great. It's
yeah.
great.
It is. It is great.
Were you there?
A couple weeks. So this was last summer. We were just in Scotland for spring break though, and that was great too.
Did you go to the west?
Mm-hmm.
The west.
Yeah, it was great.
Did you go to Iona?
No, that was a little too far for just a week.
That's great that you're doing that.
Yeah.
How are things in Methodism with you?
I think the benefit of so much time elapsing between the two general conferences had the effect of most people there was a sense of inevitability with the disciplinary changes. So I think it was less disruptive than the 2019 one.
I have come to I say it's interesting. People don't want to be married today other than the gay people. Gays are trying to save marriage.
Yeah.
And so I still think there are some interesting issues about marriage in terms of procreation as an issue. But my view is let's see how gay marriage works for 100 years. And that, excuse me. Thank you. But we heterosexuals have had 2,000 years of marriage, and we haven't done very well. Let's see how gay people do.
I think it's a great open-handed way of thinking about it. Yeah. Well, Stan, I'll be praying for you on May 28th for your back surgery, and it's good to see you. And I remain in your debt for all the work that you do.
Oh, you're very kind. And you take care of yourself.
Here, I will